This episode of the podcast is brought to you by 88 Frames Media. Look, we get it. You have an amazing idea for a podcast or a video. You know how it should look, you know how it should feel, and you know the amazing ways that it's going to connect to your audience. You just don't know how to make it come to life. That's where 88 Frames Media comes in. 88 Frames Media handles everything from podcast editing and creation, videos and reels, social media, website management, and more. They even consult with you to ensure that you get the best version of your idea. With over 10 years of experience and a variety of satisfied customers, let 88 Frames Media handle your digital presence today. Visit 88framesmedia.com for more information. That's 88framesmedia.com. You should kick it off, and I'm going to take a bite of this cookie.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sanctorum. Nope, that's not what it's called. That's definitely not what it's called.
Not what it's called.
Well, I was close. I was about halfway there.
If ladies you just kept going with confidence, that would have been great.
I mean, at least I admitted that it was wrong with confidence. I feel like that's a step in the right direction.
Wouldn't it be amazing if you just gaslit me? Like, no, it's called the Sanctorum.
Where have you been? That's what's written down in all my notes.
We've been talking about this for months.
Go on all the websites. That's what it is. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sanctum Sanctorum podcast, where comics and Christ culture collide. I'm one of your hosts, Chris.
I'm the other host, Joey.
And today we are super pumped to bring you the movie that we're bringing you.
Episode 1.
Episode 1, official episode 1.
We faked you out last time. No, we didn't. We were very clear. We were like, no, this
is the welcome episode. We were very clear that this is a welcome episode. It's the inaugural episode, but this is the real inaugural episode because we got a movie, we got a cultural thing, we got spiritual stuff, we got all the things you've been waiting to hear about.
We're going for it today. And we are covering, like we said in the last episode, we are covering Batman, The Long Halloween. One of my favorite comic lines of all time.
Right here, based on this comic by Jeff Loeb. And it is like the art in this is just spectacular. The whole thing is terrific. And it's followed by Dark Victory and Catwoman When in Rome. And they just announced it actually comes out on the 25th of December. So as of this, it has been released, The Last Halloween. And it's the conclusion to this whole saga. Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb are back, concluding their run. So that is going to be really good. I'm looking forward to that a lot. That's going to be really cool.
But before we dive into that, Chris, you have a cultural context moment that you would like to share with us while I take a bite of this cookie.
All right. I do. You know, growing up, as I did in the 90s, comic books kind of stopped being for kids. For a while anyway. A lot of comic lines, you know, everything was very ultra violent in the 90s runs. Everybody was ultra sexualized. Everything was what can we get away with in comics. And now I read it anyway, but it definitely should have been above my pay grade.
Didn't stop me.
It definitely didn't stop me, but I recognize now as an adult and as a parent that, you know, I probably shouldn't have read some of them. And I feel like now, you know, especially, you know, maybe in the last 20 years or so, I feel like comics have gotten much more cerebral. Like there's still some of the other stuff, but, you know, it deals with heavy topics and it deals with a lot of, you know, big subject matter. And
it's not light.
No, it's not really light when you look at the main runs of characters, and a lot of the most popular characters are not really people you would want to emulate. It's not really characters you would want to say, oh, you should, kids should be more like Harley Quinn. Kids should be more like Batman. I mean, not really. Like, they're great characters,
Right.
but their morally gray stuff is closer to dark gray than anything else.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if kids even read comics anymore, not only because of that, but I think that because it's more adults buying them now, they've probably been kind of priced out.
Mm.
I went to a comic shop the other day to get something, and they were $5 an issue. So $20 for 4 issues seems crazy when they used to be in cents, and then they were
Right.
$1.99, and then they've progressively gone up. So I think that that's a big problem. And I
And
also,
some of that's just the economy, but
yeah,
it's an interesting thing that you're saying is like we say the word comic and we think kids.
right. And there are still people that look at that as like, well, you shouldn't be reading comics. Aren't literature. Comics are for kids. You
Right.
clearly have not read one in a long enough time that,
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with you probably up through the beginning of the 70s. And then they got progressively darker, and then they got crazy, and then they got heavy. And
Yeah.
so but I think also part of the problem is the oversaturation. Like, why would a kid need to read comics? We got, Marvel and DC movies. We got several per year. We got tons of TV shows, both network TV shows, streaming TV shows. There's animated ones, there's live action ones. There are some that are geared for kids, like my son watches Spidey and His Amazing Friends.
Mm-hmm.
Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Those are definitely geared more towards kids. But I think that there's so much accessibility with other media that it's like, well, why do I need to read it? I can watch Spider-Man, I can watch Batman, I can.
And it's an interesting thought. It's like, well, why were these things created, right? Like even in the 40s, why did we have Captain America? Well, it was an escapism from the horrors of war,
Which is part of why it was so light.
right? Like it was a commentary on some of this stuff, but it was also a way to sort of show triumph and victory in times that you didn't feel like you had that. And yes, we still need that today, but because there's so many different mediums of media,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, is this going to go the way of the buffalo? Not just because there's alternatives, but because the subject matter has very quickly mirrored real life, right? Like there is no escape anymore. It's just commentary on what we're experiencing.
Well, it's happening it's that now it was. It was what they were experiencing. You always hear the story. The X-Men were created as a commentary on racism, and then later,
Right.
on the misrepresentation of the LGBTQ community, and they really found connection with the X-Men because it was the fear of the other, fear of something
Right.
different than what you were used to. But I think now, I think especially since, at least for me, since 9/11, and they released Marvel and DC both released tribute comics, which were, amazing about how this, horrible tragedy affected the superhero community.
Right.
It really just focuses very heavily on what's going on in the real world, which I think, for kids especially, they need an escape from that. And
Mm.
maybe not necessarily, maybe they don't always need to see how Superman is dealing with, a school shooting that happened. How is, the Avengers dealing with this, act of terrorism? I think that you can do it, but it can become too much where it's like, this is what I see when I turn on the news. This is what I hear my parents talking about. This is what we talk about in school. This should be an escape, and I don't think that's there anymore.
Right. And the struggle, too, is like A Death in the Family is an amazing comic line that talks about grief and loss and justice and, all of that stuff that's within a Batman thing. That would be an older audience. But ratings don't mean anything anymore, right? Like you and I went to a Deadpool movie and there were kids in there.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just. it doesn't mean anything. So it really is. I don't want to say it's a losing battle, because I don't want to be a defeatist. But at the same time, it's sort of like, well, I think if we understood what its intention was, then maybe we could target it a little bit more, because it's not clear, and because it has now become an industry with billions of dollars in movies. The gray is just overbearing.
Well, and I think part of the blame also has to be on the comic industry,
Sure.
not just society, because not only because of all the movies, the comics are changing to reflect the movies,
Yeah.
which I think could be a problem. Yeah, Thunderbolts is a great example of that. With the characters they have in the movie that's coming out, they've now started a run of Thunderbolts with those exact characters in it. And it's like, these guys, it makes more sense for the movies to have those characters combined because they didn't know what
Yeah.
else to do with them. That doesn't make as much sense in comics. But that's the other problem, is that how do you introduce a kid to 80 years plus of stories, and how much backstory do you give? Like, where's the jumping off point?
Well, this is so characteristic of our generation. It's like, well, you got to do what we did. You just got to start somewhere at some point, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't just have a clean. And this is where I struggle with like soft reboots and things like that. It's like, if the art is good, let the kid come in wherever the kid has to come in, and hopefully there's somebody who alongside will come and sort of guide, and like, oh, actually you need year one to be able to understand the Long Halloween, which we will get to. But that's where sort of the community of geekdom and comic culture really should shine. It's like, no, you can't just walk in and understand Infinity War. You actually need to go back to Iron Man 1.
Yeah.
And so developing that, I think, would be better. But also then you're going to have somebody who's a little bit older who's walked through this stuff and say, actually, no, you shouldn't read The Killing Joke right now.
Yeah, well, and that's more for content, but I think comics can be confusing for
Sure.
a newbie to jump into. So it's when you have someone who knows the stuff, who can say, this is a good standalone story. This is from culture who this person is, and this just stands on its own as a good story. And if you like this, then we can get
And we
into
move on.
things. Now, one thing I do like that they've started doing is they have a young adult line. I think it's called the Animal line, but Cami Garcia is a big runner of that, and she's been doing the Teen Titans. So there's
Okay.
been Raven and Beast Boy, Robin have all had their own runs, and it's these young adult graphic novels that are these characters as teenagers. They haven't quite embraced the superdom yet. They're kind of discovering their powers, figuring out who they are.
It's a character study.
It's very much a character study, and dealing with things that kids are probably, that younger people are dealing with, fighting with their parents. What do I want to do with my life? First loves, first breakups, that kind of stuff. And so I think, and I've read some of those, and those can be really great introductions, but also it kind of adds to the confusion of like, so where does this fall? If my son grows up like me and needs to know, where does this fall in the timeline of things? Like, does this fit in? Is this a different world? That can become like, no, this is its own retelling of things that has nothing to do with these series, which has nothing to do with this series. And it can become convoluted. So I think part of the reason that kids don't read also is that it is expensive. They've already got movies and TV. Why am I going to read the book? I can, the movie took 2 hours and there was no reading.
Right.
And I think that it could be a little convoluted if you're not a long-term fan, and it can be hard to find a jumping in point. It makes me sad because
Yeah.
comics were a big part of my life, and they were a big influence on my life. And so it bums me out to know that there's a whole generation of kids that know who some of these characters are, but only know the way that Disney or Warner Brothers has allowed you to know them.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever narrative they've chosen to go by is how they know. It's like, oh yeah, no, I know Batman because he, did this in The Dark Knight and did this in Batman versus Superman and did this in The Batman. I mean, he did, but he did a lot of things outside of
Way
those
more.
three things. They're
Right.
great, but here's where Batman gets real deep. Here's where you see why he's motivated to do these things, and they don't, it doesn't conflict as much for me. So it just,
Exactly.
I wish that there was more. People love geek culture more now, but I think that accessibility, price, and saturation has made it hard for. I'm surprised the comics have lasted as long as they have, especially with the digital age too. You can read them
Yeah.
on your phone, read them on your iPad, read them on your laptop. So I'm amazed that they still print um, individual issues. To be honest.
And hopefully they find a way to sort of revitalize that medium, because that is, like, if nothing else, you have to honor where it came from.
Hmm.
And it's great that it's become an industry and it's been so accepted by culture.
Yeah,
Um, I think that we just need to find a way to honor that and preserve that. Otherwise, it is going to completely morph in a way that, like, the phone isn't really the phone anymore. It's a pocket computer that has a phone app. Um, Comics might look very different, and the culture might tell a completely new narrative of what that is. But I think that we would lose something very, very special if the printed paper is lost.
absolutely. Which is why I'm a big proponent of. I don't always agree with members of my family who all have Kindles. They're like, yeah, but I can bring around, 30 books with me and never be short of something to read. I'm like, yeah, but that's not the same as
Turning a
holding,
page.
turning a page, holding a book in your hands, the weight of it, the smell of it. It's the same with a comic book. Like
Yeah,
you can study the art and it doesn't look the same when you're looking at it on a screen as when you can examine the lining and the coloring and the shadows. It's just different on the page, and the storytelling feels different than if you're reading it on your phone. Just
sure.
doesn't have the same thing for it. It makes me sound like an old man. Back in my day, we actually
You are an
read
old man.
comics.
Aren't you like 30, 100?
Yeah, yeah, 38. 38, and then it upsets me the kids don't want to read comics.
Oh, these kids. Let's just yell at them from our porch. It'd
But
be easier.
yeah, well, that's gonna be me one day. I guarantee it. I have.
Why wait for one day? Let's do it now.
Well, I
Let's
don't.
embrace what's ultimately coming.
I live in a condo. I don't really have a porch. I don't even have a patio that I can sit on and yell at kids
Do,
from. I
do
can
you have
shout out the window,
stairs?
I guess.
There you go. Wouldn't that be awesome if you became like, there's an old guy that lives in that window. Don't walk by it because he'll yell at you. And like the lore is that there's this old crotchety man, but it's a 38-year-old comic nerd.
Yep. It just yells
That would
out the
be great.
window, read a book, read a comic, pick up a hard copy of it.
Get off your phone, read a book. Anyway, we are here to discuss Batman: The Long Halloween. What year did this come out?
This came out in 2017. I'm sorry, no, 2021 it came out. 20
The
I was
movie.
the movie came out on 20 in
Correct.
2021. The comic came out in like 97, 98.
No, it's a well preserved story that has lasted many generations. The movie that we're reviewing is only about 3 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, so 2021, it's part of the Tomorrowverse, and the Tomorrowverse um, followed the New 52 universe of animated movies
Right?
that they did. This kind of is the new continuity that they were in, and they've been adapting some serious stories. They've done Crisis on Infinite Earths, they've done The Long Halloween, they did Hush. So they've really
Oh, Hush
been.
was in this?
No, but no, they've done the Hush Batman, the Batman movie Hush.
Right.
That's part of the Tomorrowverse.
Got it. I really enjoyed that one.
That one I do like.
We'll talk about that eventually on this show.
The Long Halloween, however, we both said that we have a love for the source material for this movie, and I don't know if it quite lived up to the source material, but
We're going to find out. kicking off this episode, as we will with every episode, I will write a synopsis of this movie. I will do it to annoy Chris. I will do it to make him laugh. But I will also do it to annoy him, primarily.
You know what it is? It's just that it's never really complete. There's things that are left out, and it drives me nuts.
Yep.
It's like, why didn't you? Oh, I'm not going to correct it. That's just going to be too much that nobody cares about.
It's just going to be what it is. And with each of these synopsises, there will be foreboding music. Cue foreboding music. And here we go. Batman, The Long Halloween.
Hit me.
Gotham City has a new holiday tradition: murder. So it's not new.
Yeah, not for Gotham anyway.
It's the same.
This has been years and years of celebration.
Yep. Gotham is in chaos, and so it's a normal Tuesday. But this time, there's a twist. A mysterious killer named Holiday is wreaking havoc on major holidays by knocking off members of the crime world, leaving Gotham's underworld in a state of panic. With mobsters keeling over faster than Gotham's property values, Batman must team up with Harvey Dent and Jim Gordon to bring 360 days of murder, mayhem, and mystery to an end. Juggling rogues like Joker, Poison Ivy, Scarecrow, and Two-Face, and trying to figure out if Catwoman is a friend, foe, or a flirty distraction. Batman must face the true price of justice and answer the burning question: is saving Gotham City a trick or treat? Dun, dun, dun!
I hate you. That was really good until that last little pun.
Had to ruin it.
But also, there's 365 days in a year.
What did I say?
360.
Jeez, I got too excited.
So, just as a little caveat, there's 365 days in a year, especially since the story goes from Halloween to Halloween.
Some of us were homeschooled. Math is hard.
Math is hard even if you weren't homeschooled, to be honest.
It's true. There's some really good stuff in this film. There really is.
And one of the things I have to say is the voice actors. You have Jensen Ackles, you have Naya Rivera in her final role before her tragic death. Yep. Josh Duhamel, Troy Baker. You got some great vocal performances.
How do you say his last name? David Dalmatian?
I have no idea how to pronounce it, but yes.
Can't say it, doesn't matter. He plays Calendar Man. He's phenomenal.
He is great. And Billy Burke as Jim Gordon is terrific.
Does great. The vocal quality, yes, it's a movie. Yes, it had a budget and everything, but I never really get over really good vocal quality and vocal delivery.
And I also feel like what they did now, not everybody is going to know who everybody is, but Jensen Ackles, you would know from The Boys or Supernatural. Naya Rivera was famous for Glee. So it's not like you don't know who these people are, but I also feel like their voice is not a distraction where it's like,
no.
Oh, that's clearly so-and-so doing the voice, and all I can hear is so-and-so doing it.
Even Josh Duhamel, it took me out of it a couple times.
Really?
Not like, I recognize that it's him. It's like, I forgot it's him. Because I am familiar with his work. I am familiar with his voice. And so it's like, who is this again? Oh, that's right. It's Josh Duhamel. And he's doing a really good job. I felt like nobody really focused and demanded attention on who they are, but they brought value and charisma to the character they played.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that was one of the things I really loved. And since you mentioned it, to me, the star of this movie, Jim Gordon.
Yeah.
He was my favorite part of the whole movie. He was the only character that I thought was consistent consistently. You know what I mean? Like he didn't change. He just, it was so good. I would watch the whole movie of just Jim Gordon doing stuff.
The Long Halloween is a great character study of Gordon being the anchor character for the audience.
Yes.
Batman doesn't always do that, where it provides you a sense of who you are in the story. And Gordon is that character no matter what story you're telling. It doesn't always do a good job of that. In this one, it does.
It does. Well,
You really connect with him.
I feel like sometimes in Batman stories, the audience surrogate
Yeah.
is often the victim. You know,
Mm,
it's, you have these wacky costumed villains, you have these wacky costumed heroes, and the only person I can really relate with is the victim of their battle. But I think you're right. In
or
this,
or
Gordon is
Batman,
the
and there's still a separation there.
right, because I'm not rich, I'm not, a
Right.
masterful fighter or genius intellect. But Jim Gordon is your everyman. Like, yeah, he's a police captain and he knows these crazy people, but he's just a cop. He's got a family. He's trying to make it home for trick or treating or Thanksgiving dinner and do his job. He just has to do it with all of this color around him.
Right.
And I
Right.
really liked that. I thought he was great.
What else did you like?
The opening credits I loved because it
Hmm.
was the art from the comic. It was just panels of that as it was introducing, the actors and the producers and such. And I loved that you got glimpses of that because the art of the movie is not, obviously directly lifted from the way it was in the book. And so I loved getting to see that. There was a lot of teasing about Two-Face, which I thought was really fun. They kept half his face in shadow when he's in the initial explosion in his house and he's bandaged up. You're like, oh, that's what changed him. That's it. And
And
then
that
it
wasn't
wasn't.
it.
And so I loved foreshadowing. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was very funny that Wayne Manor doesn't get trick or treaters. Like, who's gonna go? Like, I would go to
Sure.
that house, but who is going to walk up that long drive, buzz the gate, all of that stuff? Nobody is going to do that. Falcone, great. The voice work was great. The
Yep.
characterization was great. And Calendar Man, you took a D-list villain and you made him unsettling and devious,
Creepy.
menacing. He was, and it made me wish that, like, I would love to have seen him out of Arkham. And you're like, if you take that version of Calendar Man and make a Batman movie around it, I think it could be really cool. But it's Calendar Man. Who's going to do that? James Gunn might do it.
He would, and it's sort of where they took the Pattinson version of the Batman, although they infused Riddler, which we'll talk about Riddler in a little bit. But I do love that concept because it takes, and this is one of the reasons I love Long Halloween,
Hmm.
it gives you a sense of I can foresee the story without knowing every beat. Because this killer is attacking on holidays, it's like, ooh, Labor Day's coming up. Like you build the anticipation, and so the story doesn't have to, and it allows the story to take over your mind a little bit, but then it can pivot where you think it's going to go,
Hmm.
which I think it's a great opportunity for misdirection, but it's also taking the heavy lifting of the story off of the story.
Yeah, I I think one of the things about that I appreciate as well is that it kind of feels out of time.
Yeah.
It doesn't, if you watch the old Batman animated series, that felt like it was kind of placed in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch new Batman movies and stuff, it's in modern times. But this didn't have that old world feel, but also it kind of did a little bit. It just felt
Right. It
very, very like a pocket dimension
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
just this story, and I appreciated that because sometimes that could take me out of it because then it, if I'm noticing inconsistencies, it's like, well, why are they using a cell phone but they're driving a car that clearly looks like an old Rolls Royce? Yeah, I
Exactly.
never liked those juxtapositions, so I like that it did that. My last good thing kind of leads into my bad, so we'll lead into bad after we hear about the stuff that you liked.
Sure. I like that this is one of the best detective Batman stories. He is hailed as a detective, and we rarely get a scenario where it requires him to be a detective. It's always just like, oh, well, he figured it out. That's one of my main issues with The Batman with Pattinson. It's like, oh, it's a detective thing. Well, he just figures things out. That's not a detective thing. Whereas this gave you the setting for it. Now, I can see on your face, it's like, yeah, but he didn't really figure anything
He
out.
was wrong a bunch of times. He's not a
He
very good
he he
detective.
he absolutely was, but it gave the premise for him to do it. I feel like a lot of times when it's like, oh, he's got to solve this, it's like, well, does he though? We sort of know it's Joker,
Yeah,
right? Like with Killing Joke, it was like, yeah, we know where this is going.
yeah. I
Mask
mean,
of the Phantasm, we know where that's
that
going.
specifically didn't take as much detective work, but I think this story did require more detective work, and
That's what I'm saying.
he just kept going at people like it's clearly this person. Well, they
And they're
died.
like, nope.
Okay, well then it's definitely this person. Sure wasn't. All right, but so you're just working off a list of well, if it's not this person, then it's definitely this person. But he's so sure about it and wrong.
And I think that goes, and we'll talk about this, I think that goes to where he is in his Bat career. However, I'm not saying like, oh yeah, he nailed it and he knocked it out every single time. What I am saying is the scenario was a good detective story.
Okay. It had the makings of a good detective story. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'm going to save this good one because I think it's good and I know you think it's bad. So I'll wait because that'll get us into our bad. But I like, this is another one. I like that we see Batman within the first 3 minutes.
Yeah.
We're not waiting. It's not like, oh, there's Bruce Wayne. We know who he is. Oh, the villains are doing their thing. It's like, boom, we get Batman.
You dive right
That's
in.
why I'm here. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I want to see Batman within the first 5 minutes of a Batman film.
Absolutely. I do like that it jumps right into the story.
Now, depending on how our audience engages with this, there are two parts of this film. There's a part one that you can watch, and then there's a part two that you can watch, and then there's it together as a long, almost 3-hour film.
Mm.
I think it plays out stronger as a cohesive viewing. I think it's better when it's together. It's cool that it's two parts and you can sort of pick and choose, but I think it works better as a cohesive narrative when it's joined.
I actually kind of like the break because it almost feels like it almost feels episodic because of where it ends, and it almost feels like it almost feels like reading a comic, as if like these were two issues and this was the last page. And it's like, oh man, I cannot wait to read the next issue because now I got to know what happens. So I kind of liked viewing it in two parts. I get what you're saying, and I normally would have like I always thought that like Infinity War and Endgame could have been one complete movie.
Yeah,
and I see how it works, but I kind of liked it as
it's two
episodic. Also, that's a long time to sit there and watch one story going on.
It really is. And that brings me to the last of my good things. This story is, bad pun, Harvey dense, but it never feels weighed down. I feel like it's balanced naturally. It's heavy, and we'll talk about some of the issues around that, but it's well balanced from a villain, antagonist, protagonist, Batman, side character. Like I never felt like it was, tilted in one way.
Mm-hmm.
And it all moved cohesively and coherently together. It wasn't like, we moved 10 spaces up with the Batman narrative and now we have to catch up with Harvey's, or Gordon's left in the dust and we'll just pick up with him because he's a side. No, everybody moved together. Yeah. It was a lot, but we all moved together.
I can see that. I do like that. That's a great opinion. I think overall, and we'll get into this, it was an excellent movie if you disregard the source material.
Interesting.
and we'll get into some of the aspects of why that is. But I think if you don't ever read the comic and you just watch this on its own, it was a really good Batman story, really good Harvey Dent story. You just have to pretend like the source material doesn't exist.
Well, we will get into the bads, but why don't we take a commercial break and we'll be back with our bad stuff.
Sounds good.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gotham Coffee. At Gotham Coffee, we get it. Sleep's not on the menu here, but our coffee is. It's strong enough to keep you running through another night of relentless noise, flashing lights, and questionable life choices. Now you can keep up with the Caped Crusader as he tirelessly fights crime and seemingly never sleeps. His secret? Gotham Coffee. Gotham Coffee, because who can sleep in this city anyway? Sweet dreams somewhere else.
That really great. That is really great. That was funny. Very
Thanks,
nice.
Gotham Coffee.
Very
Thanks
nice
for sponsoring
job.
the show.
Very nice job.
Thank you. All right, we're back. Thank you, Gotham Coffee, for sponsoring this episode of Lunacy. We've talked about the good stuff of the Batman, the Long Halloween episode. Now we're going to talk about the bad stuff, things that we did not like. Chris, why don't you kick it off?
All right. I know this is somewhere we disagree, so we can even just focus right on this for a minute. I am not a fan of the animation of this whole universe. The whole Tomorrowverse is drawn like this with these thick black lines, this weird eye shadowing.
The black lines.
I hated every minute of it. One of the things that always irked me was that there was this generation of cartoons that came out that had these very thick, like kind of like you remember the show Daria?
Yeah.
I liked the show, but I never liked the very thick black lines.
Interesting.
Something about it just made it seem rudimentary, unfinished, like somebody was trying to like cover a mistake almost. And it bothers me. The weird like shadowing under everybody's eyes.
Let me tell you why I like it.
It's such a distraction for me. It wasn't as much of a distraction in this one as it is in some of the others, but I still hated it in this one.
Let me tell you why I like it. And I like it for the exact opposite reason of why you hate it. I like it because it focuses me. Like I mentioned, I got ADHD, and it's clear. If it's not clear up until this point, 38 minutes into this show, but I've got ADHD. So when there's a lot going on and there's a lot of colors and things like that, and I have to track with the story, it made it cool to be able to focus on the character who was speaking and some of what their motivation was, to just be like, oh, there's the black line. I need to pay attention to that. And I never really experienced that up until viewing this, where I noticed it was a thing, and I wasn't like for or against it, but with that mentality of like, this is helping me concentrate, I actually appreciated it.
I mean, I'm
allowed to be wrong.
No, I can see why people liked it. For me, it just is such a distraction for me.
Sure.
Because it just, I don't know, it just looks unfinished. It calls back to the type of animation that I've never really liked. I don't like it in art in general. There's certain comics that have, these real thick lines that I'm just like, this feels like it was done by a beginner. And I'm not trying to like insult the artist. I'm not trying to insult the animators. It's just a
stylistic choice that doesn't work for you.
Yeah, it really does. It really doesn't work for me. And I found it a distraction. The other distraction that I've had was that it's an inexperienced Batman.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Well, when it's convenient.
Yeah, like
it drives me nuts.
Like you're not a very good detective. Sometimes, he can go toe to toe with some of these guys. He's got the fortitude to go face to face with Solomon Grundy. But then the Mad Hatter is able to sneak up on him and knock him out.
Scarecrow gets the jump on him, like really.
Right, and also no body armor.
Yeah,
like he was able to put a syringe into your side or into your stomach. Like, come on.
Yeah, and that sort of connects to this point that I have that I didn't like. Like he's really inexperienced in his career, but you don't know where he is as far as his career. And you really need the comic year one, and particularly the animation year one, to understand that. You can't just walk into this and be like, oh, yeah, I know exactly where he's at. And the problem with that for me is the list of rogues that are in here are his prime. Like,
Yes.
like
And
when
there's
you're
so
facing,
many of them.
yeah, there's all of them.
The only origin you get is Two-Face. Everybody
Yeah,
else is an established
existing.
Mad Hatter, Scarecrow, Poison Ivy, Catwoman, the Joker,
Yeah,
Calendar Man,
and they're engaging with
Killer
him as though they have
Croc.
a history,
Right,
right? Like,
right.
like,
An established history, but like, how long has he been Batman at this point? Two
but
years?
but
And
Two Face doesn't exist yet. I mean, like that to me, it's it's difficult because of the story, and this goes to something else. Like, uh, none of the rogues really get developed. They're sort of existing already. Harvey is the one who gets developed because you're watching his journey, but you're expected, like, this is such a fan service concept. It's all the villains, it's them at their prime, but Batman isn't at his prime. And so you're expected to just appreciate it for what it is. Like, we put everything in there for you. That's fine, but the expense of that is the story.
I think so. Well, and that actually is one of my other issues is, when Harvey becomes Two-Face and he's starting to execute this plan of taking down Batman, taking down the Falcone crime family.
Mm-hmm.
The Joker suddenly is working for him as almost as a henchman. All right, first of all,
What?
the Joker is nobody's henchman, and
Yeah.
even if he was gonna be, this is the new kid on the block.
Yep.
Like, you knew who he was as Harvey Dent, as the district attorney, but he is a newly minted supervillain
Mm-hmm.
who hasn't even done anything really bad yet, and the people he's going after are bad people,
Yeah.
and yet the Joker is fine with just, you know, I don't mind being second banana to this guy. Like, that seems
I felt like they tried
inconsistent
to
with the Joker.
incorporate a lot of the Dark Knight, the movie, into the relationship dynamics, right? Like, if you look at Dark Knight, which was 13 years before this,
Mm-hmm.
you've got Joker, you've got Harvey, and you've got the mob, but they're all tangentially connected to this other character, which I'll get to in just a second. And they tried to also do that in Long Halloween, but you're right, that's not how the comic line went. So it is confusing when you try to then just superimpose that relationship dynamic on this story.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that again, this is me. The reason that dynamic works in The Dark Knight and it doesn't work here is because of the character of Gotham City. One of the things that I really realized in watching this one is that Gotham is a character.
Yeah.
And sometimes that character is played for laughs. Sometimes that character is played as the heart. And in Long Halloween, it is a Gotham City story. It's a story of the development of the crime underworld, the villains, the Batman who's trying to save them, the Bruce Wayne, like all of it's about Gotham. It's not about Batman. It's not even about the villains. It's how all of them are interplaying within the world of Gotham. And that's a problem for me when it's Batman The Long Halloween. Like, again, you've misrepresented what this is about. Now, I get that, like, nobody's going to buy a movie called Gotham The Long Halloween. Maybe they would. But if you can appreciate that this is a story about a city and the inner workings within it, it actually makes more sense. And again, it takes that pressure off of the characters to do all the work. But that's not what they did. They put all the pressure on the characters, and so they just kept adding them.
That was one of the few things that worked about the TV series Gotham. It was called
Yes.
Gotham. It was about, like,
Yes.
yes, it was about Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon and, this cadre of villains that, were emerging, but it was about the city and how the city
Yes.
has this effect on these people. And, I think you're right. This had a hard time making the city into its own character.
Mm-hmm.
And it was especially weird because right at the beginning, I think it's Carmine Falcone who says, I believe in Gotham City.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why? Like, we don't move on that at all. We move
Nope.
on. I believe in Harvey Dent. We move on. I believe in Batman. I believe in Carmine. I believe in all these other things. But we don't really move on. I believe in Gotham City because the city seemed to be irrelevant. Like, this could be happening in Metropolis and it wouldn't really matter.
Right. The city doesn't believe in itself.
Yeah.
Therefore, we don't have to actually acknowledge it. And I felt like that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into the other missed opportunity yet. For me, one of the biggest things was another flashback to the Wayne murders. Like, we get it. We all know there is not a, you can
Uncle Ben
hate
syndrome.
you can hate comics, but you know who Batman is, and you know what happened that night in Crime Alley.
Everybody knows
it
it.
is almost like real life history that
Yeah.
this was a cultural event. I don't need to see it again. Now I know it wasn't to tell Batman's origin. This was, a poison induced, fever dream, and I get that. But I don't need to see it again. We watch it in every live action movie, most of the animated series, most of the animated movies. I just don't need it anymore.
It
It's
was a
never changes.
poison-induced fever dream so that they could get it in there.
Well, yeah. I'm just glad it wasn't a, hey, in case you didn't know, this is how Batman became Batman. But
But
they
even the
still had to
whole,
put it
like,
in.
yeah, I just, we don't need it. We get it. And I also understand the other side of that argument that, like, you're every single time you come out with a Batman property, you are inevitably gaining new fans. Very similar to the conversation that we had. So you have to give some context. However, this is not like, oh yeah, I really need to understand The Hobbit so I can engage in the Two Towers. This ain't that.
No.
So like, we get it. If you're going to do it quick, do it tactfully and tastefully, or don't do it at all.
Or do it when it's necessary. Like, this was not a Batman origin story.
Nope.
Yes, it was early in his career, but I feel like if you're taking the time to not even introduce, to show the establishment of a huge chunk of his major villains, you're showing his relationship with Jim Gordon and this trust they already have built. You're showing how Harvey Dent becomes clean cut DA to one of the, best Batman villains in comics. I don't need Martha and Thomas Wayne getting shot by Joe Chill again.
Hashtag save Martha.
That's
the end of my bad, honestly.
All right. I got three other things. Two of them are minor things. It's like,
carry on.
Feels lazy. The scene where you see Poison Ivy has had Batman under her control, or has had Bruce Wayne under her control. Catwoman busts in, for some reason waited 3 months to make a move on him. It's like, you've been doing this for 3 months. Okay. But Bruce is fighting her and has her by the throat and is holding her up by the throat. And she says, I don't remember what she says to him, like, this isn't you, remember who you are, or something like that. Says it with a completely clear voice, says it with regular, like we're talking right now, as if, somebody incredibly strong, somebody bigger than her, is not putting all of her weight on her trachea. Like, if I just touch a little bit like this, my voice changes. So, I mean...
That did it for you?
That was annoying. Like, that seems like such a small fix. Like, just...
But it's not.
Put a little...
It's not. It's difficult.
Mother's Day. The Mother's Day murder. This one...
That was the weak one.
This one snuck up on us. If you have a killer who is killing people only on holidays, wouldn't you be extra cautious on any day that could possibly be conceived as some kind of holiday? I would be looking out for Arbor Day. I would be looking out
Siblings
for
Day, Pets
all
Day,
of that.
National Awareness of Coffee Day, like
I would look at
particularly
every
in
day.
2021.
But I'm like, especially I would think like, oh, Mother's Day is coming up, and nobody's gonna do anything that day.
We all like our mom.
So that bothered me. But those were like, weird little story things. To me, the biggest problem is that, and spoilers if you haven't seen it, Gilda Dent is the only holiday killer.
What?
That is not. That you have changed the comic. So if you don't know, in the comic, Alberto Falcone, who is Carmine's son, fakes his death and confesses to being the holiday killer. Gilda started the holiday killings, so she says, and believes that Harvey Dent, after becoming Two-Face or in the process of becoming Two-Face, did several of them as well. So you never really know for certain how many there were. There could have been as many as 3 holiday killers. There was at least one admission and one like half admission between Alberto
Right.
and Gilda. But I just feel like when you're making Gilda the only holiday killer, I mean, it's an interesting. Again, if you disregard the source material, that's an interesting choice to be the
Sure.
district attorney's wife. That's why there's baby bottle nipples used as the silencer, because she had this whole thing about wanting to be a mother and not being able to have a child and all this stuff.
Right.
But so I get how it makes sense, but it bothered me that you just had, so you had the son of the biggest crime boss in Gotham. He gets beat on, and he gets verbally abused, physically abused. He's smart but weak. It was a great reveal to make him the mastermind of taking out the mafia of Gotham, not for a whole year, outsmarting Harvey Dent, outsmarting Batman, outsmarting Jim Gordon. You made a Gilda. It
Well,
just feels boring
it's also an
comparatively.
interesting it's an interesting question when it comes to, and I'll check some of my assumptions when I say this, but it's an interesting question when it comes to source material, because take something like Civil War. When the MCU did Civil War as a film, there were limitations for the character of Spider-Man. There was a narrative that they had already been building within the
Right.
MCU, and so
They
they
didn't
had
have
to.
access to everybody that that would have been important in that story. They had to use what characters they had established and could only use them in certain ways. Yeah.
There's limitations, right? My assumption is that when you're making particularly an animated film and you're directly ripping off, and I use ripping off lightly, but when you're basing your product on an established plot line, just do the plot line. Like, you don't have to reinvent it. Just do what, like, everything's written.
Yep.
And maybe that's a bad assumption on my part, but it's like, if you're going to do it in name alone, then, then sure, change everything. Nothing actually has to stand, because then, but the problem with that is then you're just, it's the skin of the thing and not the actual thing, and then fans will be disappointed. So you have to keep enough of it so that it feels and tastes like it. And I get that you can go off to the left a little bit, but to your point, like, the beauty of it was that there was more intrigue and mystery, even when you figured out who it was.
And it made Batman faulty because he was wrong so many times, but also he just kind of is letting Gilda get away with it.
Right.
So it just doesn't make any sense. But to your point,
it wasn't a fulfilling end.
this is a storyboard. Just do this.
Right.
It's
a
laid
literal
out for you.
storyboard.
You barely need to do any work creatively.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the issue. Maybe they just wanted the creative freedom to do something different. But I did not like it. And also, it just occurred to me as we were talking about Harvey Dent. Did Harvey Dent seem kind of a lot to you?
Yeah, but an unnecessary
He
amount of
needed
a
to go
lot.
to every crime scene. You know, when they're at the when they're with I forget why they're at Gotham Harbor, but they're on the
Yeah.
dock, and he, fireman slides down the,
District attorneys don't
down
do
down the
that.
pole. It's like, come, why are you going to every? If I was Gilda, I'd be mad too. It'd be like, listen, I want to stay in and watch a movie with my husband, and why are you going to this crime scene? You're not needed unless they find evidence or they need permission to find evidence.
Yep.
Why are you here? Why are you so involved? Like, I know you're passionate, but save your passion for the courtroom. And also, there's no reason that you need to be as physically involved as you are,
Sure.
jumping off roofs, sliding off of docks. It just seems ridiculous. He was too much. He was too much.
It was too much.
He was too much for a villain that's not a physical villain.
Yeah.
He's a mental villain. He's a
Right.
planning villain. So it's not like, oh well, it was a precursor to him becoming Two-Face. He was just being a lot.
Right. And when he becomes Two-Face, he's less physical. Right? So like you start here and then all of a sudden now I'm just going to start flipping coins. It's like, no, you have to maintain that if you're going to be that villain.
Yeah, now I'm just flipping coins and firing two guns. Like, all right, but you were pretty physically fit before. Why all of a sudden are you not a brawler? That's what
Yeah.
you just were. A very athletic brawler. But that's it for me on the bad. Some of it was minor things. To me, the changes were a big deal, but you know, that's
I
a
like it.
that's a small thing comparatively, when I think overall they did a good job. Again, as long as you ignore what came before.
Totally. You want to talk about spiritual stuff?
I do. Why don't you kick us off with what you got?
Sure. So it was an interesting take on, first of all, getting back into this headspace of watching comic book properties with an intention of finding something spiritual. So that was fun, and there were a couple things that jumped out, and a lot of them come out of Harvey's dialogue. One was, can a man have, can a man live two lives? Are, all men are guilty and innocent, which makes justice nothing more than a flip of a coin. Very, very thought provoking ideologies. But the thing that really jumped out to me most is this idea that when we're wronged, when we perceive that something has been done to us, or when we've been betrayed by something, we always seek after justice, and sometimes we hitch ourselves to a new form and a new pursuit of justice, which often betrays us. And here's what I mean by that. Gilda wanted a relationship with Alberto. That was denied to her. And so then she hitches herself to Harvey because Harvey's agenda is aimed at taking down the mob. So now the two of them are aligned in some regard. And Harvey ultimately does pursue the mob. But then Harvey has his own agenda and his own journey and his own trajectory within that. And that starts to deviate from Gilda's. So then she has to become the killer, the holiday killer, to ultimately fulfill what she wanted. And what's interesting is that when we hitch ourselves to our own forms of justice, I think it can initially accomplish what we want, but ultimately it's going to make us feel empty. It's going to leave us falling short, and it requires us to create our own sense of justice all over again. And so we're constantly hopping from justice to justice to justice, and we never really get it. And that's the problem, right? There's a verse in the New Testament. It says, Romans 12:19, don't take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay. And I think a lot of well-meaning Christians have sort of just taken that, like, at the end of the day, God's got it, and he's going to pour wrath on all these evil doers. But I think that's just that's an invitation for a new form of mentality, a new way of looking at things. Like, I don't have to enact justice for myself. Sometimes I'm going to get it, sometimes I'm not. But ultimately, it's God who is over these things. It's God who ultimately serves justice. Whether I get it or not in the moment is not mine to decide, but I'm not going to let it be the driving factor in my life. Now, I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean it doesn't suck at times. Of course it does. But it allows me to take the pressure off of myself to enact justice, to hitch myself to all these faulty forms of revenge. And when I do that, it actually enables a great sense of freedom in my life.
I think that I really love that idea. I think when you were talking, the first thing that came into my mind was actually kind of the life of Moses, as far as enacting your own justice,
Yeah.
and then finding that that's all he seems to be able to do try to solve the problem himself. You know, he sees an Egyptian abusing one of the slaves, so he kills the Egyptian. He goes on the run. God tells him, listen, I need you to go and talk to the Pharaoh and free my people. And here's a reason I can't do it. Here's a reason I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. You know, I want you to speak to the stone to get water. I'm going to hit it because I think that'll be more effective.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. He's exacting his own forms of justice, doing what he thinks is best. And it never seems to work out for him. And he never seems to it never seems to click that, like, maybe I should stop doing that
Yeah.
and let God be God, you know?
Yeah, totally. I never saw that connection until you pointed it out.
So, but I think that's really important. The idea of justice. I feel like what I have kind of can relate. There's a couple of times where different characters say, "I" or "we" believe in fill in the blank. I believe in Harvey Dent. I believe in Gotham City. I believe in Batman. I believe in Jim Gordon. And those are all great, but like, how much do we say, I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in, Jesus is, God's justice. I believe in Jesus, but we don't see any evidence of that. Yeah, and I'm incredibly guilty of it, of saying, like, I believe in these things, and my life does not always carry the evidence that I do believe in these things.
Hmm.
So how is it enough to believe without evidence or action? How much do you really believe if it's not shown through your life or through your decisions? It can't be enough to just say, I believe in this cause. I believe in this aspect of faith. I believe in God. If there's no evidence to that, if you're doing nothing that shows me that, it it would make it hard to take you at your word. You know what I mean? It would make it hard for me to trust anything you say. Now, I don't mean that in dramatically. It's not like I wouldn't trust somebody because of this, but I don't know how much stock you put in the things you say you believe in
Hmm.
if I see no evidence of it. There has to be some follow through, and you saw that with these characters. I believe in Harvey Dent, but also I kind of suspect him of being the holiday killer. I believe in Batman, but I'm not going to let him handle his business. I believe in Gotham. Why?
Yeah.
Gotham is the most corrupt city in comic books. Why would you believe in Gotham City? You've been given no reason that to believe that Gotham will ever be better than it is. So it seems hollow, and I
It just
think that,
manifests this idea that talk is incredibly cheap. It's
yes,
so easy to just say things, but when the responsibility and the follow through actually does require something from you, that's when it's like, well, yeah, I don't know if I really can embody that. I don't know if I can really live that out. And that becomes
I
the
believe in
issue.
it, but if somebody else is going to handle it, I'm going to let nature run its course. But I definitely believe it. It becomes meaningless if you keep saying it and doing nothing. So, with all that being said, I think it's time to rate this
It
very very
is.
long two-parter movie. And do you want to kick it off, or should I start the ball rolling.
I'll kick it off. As we said in our welcome episode, we rate things on the Batman scale. If things are flawless, it's a Kevin Conroy. If it's great, it's a Michael Keaton. If it's good, it's a Christian Bale. Okay is a Pattinson. Fair is a Batfleck or a Ben Affleck. If it's forgettable, it's Val Kilmer. If it's so bad it's good, it's Adam West. And if it's just bad, it's George Clooney. And with everything that we talked about, everything I liked, everything I didn't like, I have to rate this at an Affleck. It was fair. It had some questionable moments. It is my favorite comic line. And because it didn't connect exactly the way that the comic did, and my first interaction with it was comically, it left some things on the table for me, and I felt like they missed some opportunities. Overall, it's a fun whodunit. It gets all the rogues in there, but ultimately it's fan service, and I felt like the story suffered because of it. So it's fine. It's an Affleck.
Wow. I definitely rated it a little higher. Now, it also being a favorite book of mine, and even despite the things that I didn't like, it was better than I remember it being. So for me, it's a Christian Bale all day. So
Interesting.
I thought it was good. Not my favorite. Not my favorite. DC animated universe. Not my favorite movie of that universe either. But I still thought it was good. I liked what I liked, and it wasn't so bad that I wouldn't rewatch it again. Again, my big thing is I have to watch it and pretend that the source material doesn't exist.
Yeah.
If I do that, I can enjoy it. If I sit here with the book and I'm like, nope, that was different. That was different. Then it would probably go lower. But if I separate the two, then I enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah, Christian Bale for me.
Fair enough. Episode 1 in the can, man.
In the can. And listen, we want to hear what your thoughts on this movie are, or what your thoughts on us are, or what your thoughts on our opinions are. We absolutely want to do that. We need you to do it. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, it's at the Sanctum Sanctorum Pod. If you're finding us on Facebook, we are at the Sanctum Sanctorum Podcast. Please interact with us there. Please comment, rate it, like it, subscribe it. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, where you'll see a lot of extra stuff, we are at the Sanctum Podcast. You can also follow me personally at the Exor Chris.
You can find me and my media company, 88 Frames Media, on Instagram. You can also visit the website, 88framesmedia.com.
All right. Now make sure you do all that. Hit like and subscribe. And in closing, remember, in a world of costume villains, be a calendar man. It'll really freak people out.
End scene.
That was good. Good job.
That was great. What are you talking about?
I loved it.
Flawless.
Yeah, I was a little nervous about getting back into the groove, but I feel like it came pretty quickly.
And you know what? If people are still listening, this is the post-credits. Check out episode 2 coming out next, where we cover Werewolf by Night.
Werewolf by Night. Enjoy.